If everybody is ready, we are going to start, just to be sure that we are on the schedule. Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Madame la Commissaire européenne, chère Hélène.
Ministers, European Commissioner, dear Elena, presidents of non-profits, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by telling you how happy I am to spend this time with you. Today, we're all here in Paris in real life, as the youngsters say. And we are here to open this conference on European policy for people with disabilities and their rights. Now, choosing the issue of disability for this Conference of Ministers, organized as part of the French presidency of the EU Council, reflects our commitment, as well as your commitment. It also reflects a strong and shared ambition. We seek to do our utmost to remove obstacles that still prevent PWDs from fully participating in society and in the economy. We want a society that will be more inclusive, where we prioritize the rights of persons with disabilities. They deserve a full recognition, and we need to achieve that recognition so as to advance this cause, which is everybody's business in the EU. More than ever, disability is everybody's business. In my country, which is France, 1 person in 5 is affected by disability. So we're talking 12 million people. I'd also like to remember the 8 million caregivers who support PWDs on a daily basis, people who need assistance, whether they be seniors or disabled individuals. So in Europe, we're talking 87 million people affected by disability to varying degrees. The European Union is fully committed to promoting the rights of persons with disabilities, and would like to congratulate Commissioners Elena Dalli and Nicolas Schmit for the amazing work that they've been doing together. Following the previous European strategy for the 2010-2020 period, which paved the way for a barrier-free Europe and for empowerment of persons with disabilities, the Commission adopted a new 2021-2030 strategy, the goal of which is to make sure that all PWDs, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, religion, beliefs, age, or sexual preference, benefit from equal opportunity as well as equal participation in society. They should be able to decide how they live, with whom they live. They should no longer fall prey to discrimination. And yet, despite the inroads that we have made together in Europe in recent years, we still have a long way to go. The COVID-19 crisis has hit disabled individuals harder than anyone else. And this is a sole reminder that we now have to ramp up our efforts. All too often, the issues pertaining to disability are surrounded with misunderstandings and prejudices. One wants to boil it down to the medical aspect only, and PWDs are often considered as objects of care and not as subjects with rights in their own right. And there are many additional obstacles to PWDs and their families in their daily lives. So the time has come for us to jolt ourselves into action. It is time for the EU to come together, change the way that we look at disability, and also ramp up our work. I would like to congratulate you all the panel members, everybody who are all hands on deck to fuel our work. Let us start with the managers of non-profits. You may have different approaches, but you've been able to create positive momentum. You've confronted ideas, you've gathered different types of skills and expertise. Also, many thanks to EU-level public decision makers. Thank you for making yourselves available to share your vision, your experience, your initiatives in your respective countries. It is important for the issue of disability not to be just a flavor of the day. It should be a stepping stone. And today we're going to exchange views. We're going to discuss the different issues that pertain to disability: education, training, integration into the jobs market, citizenship, accessibility. And each session, I hope, will become a milestone towards growing awareness, the kind of awareness that we want to trigger. We want to help people change the way that they think. It is key as we seek to build a more inclusive, a fairer, and a more supportive society. And I know that we still have many expectations. Of course, much remains to be done in order to improve implementation of existing law, particularly when it comes to universal accessibility. It is important for everybody to get all hands on deck, whether in the EU or in the rest of the world. Our social integration model is being tested by this unprecedented health crisis, which still affects our societies. We need to rethink the terms for implementing public policy so we can truly create new economic and social momentum. We need to break free from a rationale in which we're stacking schemes and mechanisms on top of each other. We need to achieve better consistency, a more inclusive rationale that will rely on a welcoming and supportive society. But this means changing the way that disability is represented within society. But first and foremost, we still need to work really hard on improving the environment. The requirement of universal accessibility in schools or to employment or to public amenities, implementation has been partial. In a country such as France, a more inclusive society is a challenge, but it is also a necessity. Stacking schemes and funding leads to a system that is complex and difficult to navigate for our fellow countrymen, for their families, and it damages the building of a seamless journey through life, particularly when people grow old. Isn't it time that we devise a society where goods and services are accessible to all, where all citizens can showcase their capabilities as they exercise their fundamental rights? On this front, I would like to share with you a number of beliefs. This conference seeks to bring together every stakeholder so that together we can build something together instead of just adding speeches on top of speeches. We seek to provide the different stakeholders, including professionals, institutions, and the people themselves, their loved ones, and their caregivers, a new way for designing answers that will meet their expectations and their needs. This paradigm shift is only possible if we start from the person's expectations, if we build a response around the person, design it around their living environment. This transformation is necessary. And of course, we will bring in their expertise. In an inclusive society, the society should adapt to the person's uniqueness, not the other way around. We also need to look at the person's environment, evaluate their ability to live independently, quality of access as well. Societies should also be inclusive across the board, at every local and regional level. This society should go on the offense and should not compromise when it comes to fighting stigma and discrimination. We should take into account issues pertaining to disability in every policy area. Disability policies are cross-cutting policies, and it is undoubtedly in that direction that we should persist, because disability policies will only produce results if all departments, all ministries are mobilized and fully involved. A cross-cutting approach, an interdepartmental approach, a universal approach. These are the guiding principles that will guide our work. We need to start a dialogue between professionals and experts from all walks of life around issues as diverse as schools, employment, housing, access to culture, leisure, sports. We will also focus specifically on research on ASD, autism spectrum disorders. That'll be our focus during lunch. It is by combining approaches that we pool our brain power and resolve disability issues in all their shapes and sizes. In order to provide the best possible assistance, we need to actuate every driver that we have. We need to learn to overcome these sometimes artificial distinctions that we build between the health-driven approach and the medical social approach. This is the political challenge, but also the humanist challenge that I suggest we all address together. Disabled persons should no longer be misunderstood. They should be able to find restored serenity in their relationship with other people. They should find in society a place where they can fulfill their potential and not be singled out. Dear colleagues, I wish to conclude this introduction by paying close attention and keeping in our thoughts the Ukrainian people. Today we're talking about the place of citizens in societies. EU member states are getting together today around the issue of disability, but let's remember what is happening in Ukraine. Thousands and millions of people are being deprived of their basic rights, dignity, protection, housing, education, enough to eat. In the face of such a situation, needless to say, I have a particular concern, and I'm sure that you all share it. I have a particular concern for Ukrainians with disabilities who currently live in fear. Faced with this situation, the onus is on us to get all hands on deck. Let's give them a refuge, but also provide them with as much assistance as we can. And I know that everybody here, all EU members, will want to provide them with that assistance. And on behalf of the French presidency of the EU Council, I would like to share with the Ukrainian people my words of support. We will take some time at the end of this morning to discuss this issue. It is important for us to hear from our friends from Poland and also neighboring countries. We need to take stock of the situation, come up with solutions together. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to now declare open this conference on European policy for persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Bonjour. Hello, ministers, dear colleagues. I am honored to address you at this Disability Rights Conference, and I thank State Secretary Cluzel and the French presidency for placing disability high on the presidential agenda. Every crisis, whether it is the pandemic or the war, reveals and amplifies existing barriers, disadvantages, and risks, hitting harder the most discriminated in our societies, such as persons with disabilities. Regrettably, we are facing a big refugee crisis, and we as a union confronted with such a humanitarian disaster are reacting fast and decisively. Yesterday, we adopted Cohesion's Action for Refugees in Europe, called We Care. So we will help fully with social inclusion of these refugees. Katarina here will fill you in on the details of this program. Around 87 million persons have some form of disability in the EU. And we must ensure that they can enjoy their rights fully on an equal basis with others in all fields of life. Despite progress, persons with disabilities continue to face considerable obstacles in exercising their rights. This is due to insufficient accessibility, discrimination, and prejudice that hinder access, for instance, to employment or education. Half of persons with disabilities are in employment compared to 75% of those without disabilities. Only approximately 30% of persons with disabilities attain a degree, while more than one in four struggle to make ends meet. The need for action at all levels is very clear. We must ensure a fully accessible environment, inclusive education, and access to quality jobs. The recovery from the pandemic must be fair and inclusive, and obviously nobody should be left behind. To achieve these goals, 1 year ago, the Commission adopted a new disability rights strategy. The strategy frames our action at EU level and supports and complements the action taken by member states. I would like to thank all member states, organizations of persons with disabilities, and civil society for your support to this strategy. Our strategy continues to align the EU's disability policy with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The convention is the compass that has guided us in the elaboration of the strategy and will continue to be our reference point in its implementation. Our joint commitment will be essential to make the strategy a success and create impact. Today's conference gives me the opportunity to update you on the implementation of the strategy. The work is ongoing across all its teams with the goal that over the next years we will roll out numerous actions and flagship initiatives. I will focus on the main topics of today's event: accessibility and mobility, education and employment. Today's exchange will provide ideas and experiences to contribute to our action going forward. Coming to the first theme of the conference, accessibility is an enabler of rights, autonomy, and equality, and is a precondition for the full participation of persons with disabilities in society. In 2019, the European Accessibility Act has been a milestone in this area. The Commission will pay close attention to the correct transposition and implementation of all EU rules on accessibility and identify gaps where further action is needed in close cooperation with member states and all players involved. With the Access City Award, we continue to recognize the commitment and results of cities in making their environment more accessible and inclusive. The holder of the title this year is, as you know, Luxembourg City. With our flagship initiative, European Resource Centre Accessible EU, we will step up the cooperation to increase coherence in accessibility policies and facilitate access to relevant knowledge. Your expertise is vital, and I encourage all of you to engage in the preparation of this initiative, notably within the Disability Platform. Free movement is a cornerstone of EU integration, yet persons with disabilities often face barriers when exercising this right. We want to make it easier for persons with disabilities to get the right support when they travel or move to another EU country. Next year, we will propose the establishment of a European disability card. This would help the mutual cross-border recognition of disability status for card holders in full respect of member states' competencies. This initiative will build on the experience of the EU Disability Card pilot project and of the European Disability Parking Card, with a view to be recognized by all member states. Persons with disabilities have the right to participate in education on an equal basis with others. Education empowers people, and it lays the foundations for creating inclusive societies. Our strategy reaffirms the value of inclusive and accessible education. And it recognizes the considerable need for action in this area, as demonstrated by the gaps in outcomes between learners with and without disabilities. With policy tools and funds, the EU will continue to support national reforms for inclusive education at all levels in line with the UN Convention. Only half of all persons with disabilities, as I already indicated, are in employment. This, of course, must improve. Unlocking this potential will benefit not only the individuals concerned, but the economy and society as a whole. That is why we will step up our efforts to promote more and better jobs for persons with disabilities. An inclusive labour market, providing equal opportunities for all, is our objective. To that end, we are working on a package to improve the labour market outcomes of persons with disabilities as outlined in the strategy. We will present it under the Czech presidency this year. I will be very pleased to hear your views in order to develop this package. Reducing the employment rate gap between persons with and without disabilities is one of our key objectives. This is reflected in the indicators linked to the European Pillar of Social Rights to track progress on social Europe. In that regard, we call on Member States to establish by 2024 targets for increasing the employment rate of persons with disabilities. We also call on Member States to strengthen the capacities of employment services for persons with disabilities and enhance the work with social partners and organizations of persons with disabilities. So we really hope that Member States will adhere to these objectives, and we count on the support of the French, Czech, and Czech presidencies to advance in this direction together. To pursue the implementation of the disability strategy and of the UN Convention, close cooperation is essential at all levels. We can only succeed together through coordinated action at both national and EU level. And our dialogue with persons with disabilities and their representative organizations continues to be key. This is why we launched the Disability Platform last year. It will facilitate our cooperation with the Member States, organizations of persons with disabilities, and civil society, offering a forum for exchange and mutual learning. I invite you to share your expertise and ideas in the platform, in particular to shape the next flagship initiatives of the strategy. We encourage Member States to adopt ambitious national strategies to foster the implementation of the UN Convention and of the EU Disability Strategy at the national, regional, and local level. We also call on stepping up the cooperation among EU institutions, notably by designating disability coordinators, including in the Council. As far as the Commission is concerned, disability coordinators have been nominated in the majority of our departments, and an inter-service group has been established to coordinate the strategy's implementation internally. And finally, to achieve results, we will keep promoting the use of EU funding and support for reforms in the Member States for accessibility, inclusion, and independent living. In particular, cohesion policy funds and the Recovery and Resilience Facility will play a key role in this respect. So I wish us a fruitful conference, and I look forward to continuing working with all of you to ensure the rights of persons with disabilities within a union of equality. I thank you.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I will ask you for a few seconds before I take my place. I'm going to try and show you my helper's face rather than his back. So you have a nicer show, a nicer vision. My computer is starting. Sorry, I'm telling you everything, giving you the whole description. Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to cover this first session, which, as you will have understood, is about universal access and mobility. These are a few of the questions we're going to cover. I'm going to make a small presentation first. I'll try not to mispronounce your family names. I hope you will forgive me because I don't speak all the languages that will be spoken today. Another thing, as you will have understood, we have a very close timetable, so I'll try to be as short as possible, and so that everyone can speak. So for the first session, I'm going to ask Justina Jacques-Tien to join me. She's Deputy Minister of Social Security and Labour. Mr. Just from Estonia. Jesus Martin Blanco, the Director General for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from Spain. Alistair de Gaetano from Malta. He chairs the Autism Advisory Council at the Directorate for Disability Issues Ministry for Inclusion, Social Wellbeing. And for Slovenia, we have Andrejka Not, General Director for the Ministry of Labour, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities. So for each session, the session of this morning and the session of the afternoon will have a testimonial. And for the first session, we have Sif Holst, who is Vice President of Disabled People's Organizations in Denmark. So before I give the floor to the ministers and to you, Mrs. Holst, we're first going to hear Karina Ivankovic-Knelic, who is Head of Social Rights and Inclusion for the European Commission. And we're going to look at the rights at European level. You have 7 minutes, madam.
Let me just leave all this technical stuff. So good morning to all, and I would like really to welcome you on behalf of DG Employment. And I would also like to pass the message of the greetings of my Director General, Jos Korte, who unfortunately could not be here today with us, but this is a very dear topic to him, and he has been extremely supportive in all the actions in regard to the disability in DG Employment. I would also like to thank you, Madam State Secretary, for all the activities that you have been showing during the French presidency, but not only during the French presidency, also you have been front runner for many positive aspects in regards to improving the position of persons with disabilities within the whole EU. And of course, I think next to you, you have another important front runner, which is also keeping us quite busy, I have to say. Maybe just to refer before I go fully into the accessibility, the Commissioner has mentioned, and I believe all of us are spending last days in the same manner, that we read before we go to bed the news about Ukraine, and we wake up in the morning and check what has been happening. And I believe for the persons with disabilities, this has been even more difficult. Either they are living in Ukraine or they have fled out of Ukraine. And I'm therefore extremely happy, as the Commissioner has announced, that yesterday we have adopted this package of so-called cohesion action for refugees in Europe called We Care. Let me quickly tell you what it is about. It is about using all the remaining funding within the previous programming period. And I know many of you do not have much money left, but for those of you who do have something either in the ERDF or ESF or REACT-EU or the new REACT-EU for 2022, you can spend it for all the actions. So there will be no limit in transferring ERDF if there are some remaining elements into the ESF. And the actions could support everything in relation to the refugees, either infrastructure, education, social inclusion, psychological help, support to the, including persons with disabilities. And this, of course, has to be negotiated and in the trialogues, but we have a strong commitment of the Council and the Parliament to act quickly. And what is very important, the eligibility period is 24 of February, which unfortunately will be remembered for Russian invasion of Ukraine. So let me come back to the UNCRPD Article 12 and everything in relation to the accessibility. The Commissioner has already pointed the most important elements of accessibility. And for those of you who know our very ambitious strategy by heart, I believe you can see that accessibility as enabler of the rights is actually the key element of our strategy. Within the accessibility, there are several elements, and I would like to to inform you a bit more about the implementation of the Accessibility Act, about the Accessible EU, and about the transport package, if you can call it a package, and also the disability card. So the Accessibility Act, you know very well, long discussion, 10 years of preparation to end in 2019 with the adoption of this important directive. This important directive has to be transposed in the national legislation quite soon, next 3-4 months. So the deadline is 28th of June. And the deadline of 28th of June means that it needs to be transposed in your national legislation, but the start of the measures of the full implementation is actually June 2025. But this still does not mean that all the legislation efforts do not have to be done before. The Commission has supported the understanding of this act. It is one of the most complex directives, I would say, within all of our legal framework. We had 11 meetings with the national experts, and all of the member states have appointed the contact points and the experts. Unfortunately, 10 of those meetings were online, and we only met once in person. But the member states have asked, reflected, we have tried to provide the best possible expertise in order really to lead you in a successful implementation of and the transposition of the Accessibility Act. We see the variety of approaches, and if you allow me for my personal reflection, every approach is fine. Either you have put all the elements in one legal form, one law, or you have directed it towards either a revision of existing laws or bylaws, or you have chosen some third way forward. But what is important is that by 28th of June, we do see what is there, because we will immediately start reflecting on the transposition. Now, the big flagship Accessible EU. I know a lot of you are expecting a lot, and you are right to expect a lot. It will be so-called resource center. And why? Because the accessibility has so many faces. It's not only the Accessible EU, it's standards, it's different elements included in different directives, recommendation, guidelines. And this center will foster the volunteer framework, cooperation framework, and will serve as entry point for knowledge on accessibility. It will provide the opportunity to bring together the organizations, to bring together institutions who are involved in fostering and implementing the accessibility, and also will provide additional clarity what these requirements, especially in the light of the accessibility standard, means. Just a couple of days ago, weeks ago, in February, within the second meeting of the disability platform, we have initiated the adoption of a subgroup for Accessible EU. Many of you have expressed interest. I have to tell you, I was really surprised because I expected a bit more modesty and shyness, but thank you very much for surprising us. And this subgroup will start working very fast because we do have additional support to you, which in a form of help, assistance, but also in financial means, because we have a big, easy grant, which is really more than, well, almost 20 million euro for 4 years. And part of this allocation will be dedicated to you, to the member states, for the help in setting the Accessible EU and finding out the right place where your accessible contacts should be and should be put. We will expect a lot on your feedback because it is a knowledge center. It is center for sharing expertise, and we are very much looking forward for the work of the subgroup. Then let me tell you something about some transport and the mobility. The passenger rights, they guarantee a right to non-discrimination in access to transport and to receive assistance free of charge for passengers with disabilities or reduced mobility, either they are traveling by air, rail, maritime, or bus and coach. In December 21st, last year, the Commission adopted the evaluation of 3 passenger rights regulation with relevance of persons with disabilities when traveling by air or on waterborne passenger rights and on bus and coach passenger rights. And this was the initial step for the revision of the EU passenger rights acquis. You know it very well, it's written in our strategy. The impact assessment will follow and is currently being prepared because we do plan to take a decision on the chosen measures to be revised in 2023. This is very much in line with our deadlines from the strategy, and we do expect to really follow it. Also, last December, we have adopted the legislative proposal to revise so-called Trans-European Transport Network guidelines. And within these guidelines, we have included everything relevant to the so-called urban transport hubs to the persons with disabilities. In simple words, it means the urban transport hubs are not to be the train station, which need to be fully adopted to the persons with disabilities. Also, we are happy to announce that this year we will have a communication on sustainable urban mobility plans, and I think this is also going to contribute to fulfilling your rights completely. On the European Disability Card, I think Commissioner said it all practically. We will build on European Parking Card and EU Disability Card pilot project implemented in 8 member states with a very good evaluation, with a very good outcome. And for me, for all of us dealing with disability, the satisfaction of persons with disabilities who have been able to use this disability card was really a motivating element to move forward and to propose the disability card, which will be accepted in all member states. Of course, as pointed out by our commissioner, we will fully respect member states' competencies. We are now in the process that, together with our legal service, we are assessing which would be the best form for the disability card. Of course, us from the service level, we want to be as ambitious as possible and to have something that could be really an obligation for all member states to introduce, but also we need really to see, because there is a very thin line between not overstepping the member state competencies, and therefore we will be very careful in assessing where to go together.
Madame, je vais devoir vous inviter à vous diriger par...
I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you to conclude.
Just to conclude, all of this would not be possible without the stakeholders. That's why we work closely with the member states, but with the civil society, with the social partners, and especially in the employment package, which we will speak a bit about later. So thank you very much, all of you again. And I apologize if I was a bit too long. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. C'était tout à fait intéressant. Malheureusement.
Thank you very much. Most interesting. Unfortunately, we are pressed by time. We're going to be pressed by time throughout the day. So I'm going to ask Ana Perez, who is a European Secretary for Disabled People, to tell us a few words. You have 7 minutes, madam. Dear friends, ministers, colleagues, I'm going to take the floor in the name of the European Forum for Disabled People. This is an independent organization which has been present for 25 years, created by disabled people and representing over 100 million of men and women suffering from a disability, plus our families. We thank the French presidency for inviting us to take part in this major conference. Before I start, I would like to make a small declaration on the situation of disabled people in Ukraine. During armed conflicts, disabled people, especially those who live in a special institution, and mothers as well, suffer from abandon. They are being abandoned or killed. They also suffer from a lack of security and basic services. I believe it's absolutely necessary for all member states and for the EU to set up specific humanitarian aid measures to protect the life and safety of all the disabled people who remain in Ukraine, as well as those who are trying to seek asylum. In the name of European disabled people, we're launching a call for bringing this help to disabled people. I believe that the European strategy for disabled persons is clear. It commits to protect the disabled people and promote their rights. And in order to make sure that the convention is properly implemented, I believe this is an obligation if we really want to implement the UN Convention. There is no possibility of mobility without accessibility, no access to justice or health or protection against violence if there's no accessibility. Accessibility is a basic principle which guarantees the fact that we can exercise our rights. We cannot accept the discrimination of disabled persons in all areas and all walks of life. And this discrimination is even worse when you have other factors such as social exclusion, exclusion due to gender or sexual orientation. And this often happens when you talk about disabled women and girls. After 13 years of problems, we hope we can find a solution to this equality of treatment. The principle of accessibility must be guaranteed. And this European Act on Accessibility depends on how the are transposed into national legislations. It's a bit, and this transposition must be done together with the organizations of disabled persons. We have to seize all opportunities to bridge the gaps. The European Act, is supposed to give access to the emergency number 112. Why not also give this access to the numbers of victims of violence or other services? Why not use the same requirements for these other services? The Act also establishes voluntary requirements for the built environment. Why not use this opportunity to update these national standards for buildings, also for transportation or transportation hubs, and it must apply to urban and also regional transport. There's also the digital market, artificial intelligence. It would be a big mistake if the legislations did not include the same requirements as the European Accessibility Act. This is absolutely essential, and accessibility must be compulsory in order to, we must improve the energy efficacy of buildings if we want to head towards a more environmentally based economy, a greener economy. This means, for example, working on the Trans-European transportation network. We must also guarantee that all new buildings and buses in our cities are accessible. If we don't, we're going to face in the future higher costs and and we will not be able to face the aging of our Europe. So Accessible EU is going to bring us, and we're very happy about it, the human and economic resources that we need to be efficient, and we also hope that the member states will establish similar centers at national level to work in a coordinated fashion at regional and national level. And we also are happy to talk about the disability card. Nevertheless, it must have a solid legal basis in all the EU countries. If you don't mind, can you summarize before and conclude? Well, as I was saying, it's important for this European card to guarantee the mutual recognition of disability in all the countries of the region. The principle of mobility and accessibility must be present in all discussions, for example, about inclusive education, employment, social funds, resilience mechanism, and all this must include the training of helpers in the schools, for example, and also support to disabled students. The employment package must also guarantee access to the labor market for disabled persons. and recognize the additional problems for disabled women who have trouble accessing the labor market. And as we talk about women, I must say that in our forum is very happy to see the discussion of the EU on the domestic violence. It's a most important topic. We feel EU is not being sufficiently ambitious for the moment, but it's a good step to protect European women and girls. And all this it's important to ask for accessibility, and all victims of these violence must have accessibility. In the name of our forum and all its members, we're available to work with you to reach the objectives of the European strategy, following the idea that nothing about us should be done without us. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. After the common European vision, let's hear about the situation in the various countries, still with the idea of sharing the best ideas. What are the persistent barriers in terms of accessibility? This is the question we're going to ask from the various countries. Let's go to Lithuania.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Dear Presidency, dear colleagues, I'm really happy being here and discussing really important topics for all of us, especially in the context of Ukraine. And regarding the barriers that we are facing now, of course, number of years Lithuania is doing a lot of efforts to remove those barriers, but well, today we still have a huge work to do, and even as many as 65% in Lithuania, people with disabilities experience difficulties living independently, using public services, acquiring goods and services due to inaccessible environment. And I think the first step, what needed to be done, and we already in the process, and the first barrier that should be eliminated is we really had a long-term lack of strategical planning, long-term strategical planning. We do understand that we won't make change in one year, in one political cadency, and we need a long-term strategy. And when I say a long-term strategy, it's integrated long-term strategy in the different policies. That means that disability policies is not only social policy. It is health policy, educational policy, environment policy, even financial policy as well, regional development, and the strategical planning that we are implementing and stepping forward is integrated planning, not segregated. That means that disability topic is each policy, public policy topic. And in long term, we do have all the questions in the strategical plan, and we know all the steps that we have to do. Implementing the strategy, disability strategy, in implementing United Nations recommendations, and etc. That is really important in the long-term view. The other thing that we are facing now is regarding the infrastructure, inaccessibility, regarding informational accessibility. It is really insufficient legal regulation. When we see that the infrastructure is inaccessible, we can define with one view. But informational inaccessibility is not always easily to define, and a lot of people even do not understand what is information inaccessibility. So insufficient regulation, one, that we have to change, and we are already planning a lot of changes and a lot of legal changes during this year. The other thing is we do not have a sufficient monitoring and control system. monitoring and control in infrastructure accessibility, informational accessibility. And if we do not see the whole picture, we do not understand the problem. We do not have the cure how to go forward. So monitoring and control system is one of our key work that and the barrier as well that we have to eliminate. The third thing is, of course, the lack of guidelines. When we make a legal regulation, and I hope this year will be the year when we regulate a lot of things, especially information accessibility, we need special guidelines, special methodological documents, especially for information and accessibility, because each municipality, each public or private entity has to cope with informational inaccessibility. And they have to have guidelines or best examples or best practices provided how to do it in the best way and avoid the mistakes. So we actually, in the final steps of the guidelines, for information accessibility, and we are really looking to different practices that countries are creating, and especially we are taking examples from France and doing actually the best and the most guided context.
D'où l'idée du partage des bonnes pratiques.
Now, talking about best practices, that's very interesting. What about obstacles with you in Estonia?
Thank you very much. Well, of course, countries are very similar in their problems with accessibility. But what I wanted to highlight is that one of the major obstacles have been that there is a certain hierarchy to the requirements. So, for instance, if you are taking into use new environment, built environment, or is it electronic environment as well? So there has been certain rules which are more addressed than the accessibility. But here I can clearly see that with help of European legislation, we can improve the situation. And we already have the monitoring mechanism in place for built environment, for the web accessibility, and now with the European Accessibility Act, that will be even more enforced. What I also wanted to highlight is that the long-term plan is really important, and Estonia has the Estonia 2035 strategy, which has embraced accessibility and disability topics. And 2019 to 2021, just recently, we had a really intensive, a really visible working method of accessibility task force, which has been able to bring the visibility on accessibility to a very new, higher level. Thanks.
So, from the northern reaches of Europe, we can now move off into Spain. So, Mrs. Blanco, what problems do you meet to make accessibility fully operational? Hello, thanks very much. Thank you very much. Before talking about the obstacles, I'd just like to talk briefly about Ukraine. Because in actual fact, here we are on this stage under the banner of the Universal Rights of Man. This is a fundamental democratic principle. We need to be here to defend peace. This is a human right, peace, for all human peoples. And we're seeing this unwarranted act of war in Ukraine. And so freedom will be wiped off the map, as well as the notion of legality. This is why in Europe we need to be showing that we are Europe of solidarity, social justice, and individual rights. So before talking about obstacles, I'd like to suggest that we make a joint statement to welcome the people of Ukraine in the EU, and this is done under the banner of accessibility, inclusiveness, international accessibility and inclusiveness, because this will show how impactful we are and our commitment to the handicapped by welcoming people in an inclusive fashion. Now, I turn to your question. In Spain, the Spanish government sees accessibility as a fundamental right. If you think about any right, you cannot enjoy any right. It's not effective. I mean, the European Forum of the Handicapped of Disabilities said this very well. Now, there are problems in terms of universal accessibility. Obviously, money. But thanks to the Next Generation Fund, we're going to be investing close to 200 million euros to make sure that Spain becomes accessible, to ensure that all those or the handicapped can travel freely. In June this year, we will have transposed the Accessibility Directive, and as requested by civil society, we'll be broadening the scope of internal legal framework to extend into areas that the directive didn't mention, because we want to be present in all spheres of life as handicapped people. We want to be able to make a contribution to European progress. To do this, goods and services need to be accessible. And these funds will make it possible to create jobs for the handicapped. And so European construction needs to take into consideration European social rights. Now, the Spanish government is a feminist one, and working to further the rights of the handicapped will be very much part and parcel of including women and girls who are the handicapped. We need to listen to them, because we need to make up for the very macho, virile years in our society. And the Spanish government wants to very much to make sure that addressing disability should be a norm and not an exception. Now, drawing inspiration from the European Disability Directive, we learn from other countries, but thanks to civil society, thanks to particular individuals and organizations that represent so many mothers and fathers who are carers, I'd like to express my recognition, my gratitude to all those organizations that make it possible for Spanish people suffering disabilities to have a better life. Are there any specific barriers to mention?
Merci. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you very much.
Thank the French presidency for the invitation to Malta to be part of this discussion. I'd also like to convey the greetings of the Honorable Giulia Farrugia Portelli, our Minister for Inclusion, Social Wellbeing and Voluntary Organizations, who unfortunately could not be with us today. I'd also like to join our colleagues in expressing the solidarity of the people of Malta with the people of Ukraine during the current events. And as was mentioned also, accessibility is always a fundamental right, but especially in times of conflict, it is even more and more of a pressing need when you have persons with disabilities who actually have double discrimination in their respect. And in this respect, I would also like to refer to the guidance issued by the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities a couple of days ago. Now, when it comes to Malta and specific challenges which we are seeking to address as regards accessibility, we launched a national strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities in September of last year. This is aligned also with the main precepts of the UN Convention and also of the European Disability Strategy 21-2030, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. However, it also focuses on a number of issues which are very specific to the Maltese context, which, while being challenges for everyone, need also be dealt with together with all relevant stakeholders from a local angle. And some of the key things which the strategy wants to tackle over the next 9 years are, first of all, A key thing that comes to mind is accessibility of road and transport infrastructure. Malta already has strong regulations and legislation in place to ensure that these infrastructure is accessible. However, there's also review and reporting mechanisms in place, and also focus on certain challenges such as pedestrianization, which in Malta need more and more focus. There's also the issue of transport, specifically when it comes to public transport and taxi services. And here there's also specific subsidiary legislation. However, we also want to work on more stakeholder involvement. When it comes to tourism, tourism is one of the mainstays of the Maltese economy. So we already have an accessible tourism policy in place, but we want to make sure to work further with stakeholders, including local councils, local government entities, to make sure that there's involvement and ownership by all involved in the process of making sure that Malta is accessible and welcoming, not only to the locals, but to anyone who's visiting our beautiful country. And in this respect, we also want to make sure to align with European and international standards to make sure that we are at the forefront when it comes to ensuring accessibility. Another important thing is accessible information, both when it comes to policy, but also when it comes to formats. So we want to work with local stakeholders, such as the Foundation for IT Accessibility, and also Agencia Support, the National Service Provision Agency, but also drawing on best practices to make sure that we have a guidance document that brings everything in one place, and also refers to international standards and obligations. For example, those which emanate from the Web Accessibility Directive, from the Marrakesh Treaty, which Malta is also bound by. Another important thing is making sure that these resources are accessible to all. And also, for example, when it comes to blind persons and persons with print disabilities, making sure that they have, let's say, in local libraries, access to different books and different materials. In fact, recently, also to promote the strategy, Malta had issued a grant scheme to local councils and NGOs to make sure that there are like initiatives on the ground to implement the strategy. And one of the projects we actually awarded was one of the local councils is making sure that its local library also has materials whereby, for example, there's a number of books in Braille and other accessible formats which are available to children from the locality, but where there's also work with other local councils to make sure that children from other local councils can also access these resources.
Donc là, moins que des freins, vous nous exprimez les choses qui fonctionnent. Est-ce que...
You're talking about barriers. So before closing, any barriers that you'd like to mention? Anything that's tricky to set up in terms of accessibility?
We are actually, mentioning a number of things that are working, that is true, but what we are mentioning is that there are challenges in these areas. So we are focusing on making sure that, for example, I mentioned an accessible information policy. We still don't have enough accessible books, accessible materials. There is still not enough coordination when it actually comes to making sure that all different entities follow the same rules. When it comes to tourism, there are still challenges. There are some matters which are accessible, some matters which are not accessible, with roads, with transport infrastructure, with public transport. A lot of changes have been made. So what the strategy is doing is this strategy is trying to see, okay, where are the main areas, where are the main challenges? So these are all areas where there are challenges. There's a couple more things, for example, when it comes with state entities, are they accessible, for example? The justice system, victim support, legal capacity, we have issues in all of those areas. So what we want to do is this. We acknowledge that good things have been done, but we want to continue working in these areas to make sure that where we do have lacunae, where we have issues, we continue to build upon that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. What about Slovenia in terms of problems that you still encounter? And the second part of our discussion will be talking about sharing best practices and the European initiative that you wish to implement, the 2021-2030 strategy, for example. But first, let's see where things stand in Slovenia in terms of accessibility, if you don't mind.
Yes. Thanks to the French presidency to invite us to this conference. And it's nice that we can spend about these topics here. For this topic, yes, in order to implement the EU strategy and also this
Convention, Slovenia has adopted a new action program for persons with disabilities 2022-2030, which enter into force in January 2022. And this also covers the whole area of accessibility and multimodal mobility. Slovenia has adopted several regulations to regulate the area of accessibility. First, one of the acts adopted is Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disability Act, which regulates the prohibition of discrimination on the ground of disability in access to goods and services available to the public. Then Slovenia is also in the final phase of transposing the EU Accessibility Act into Slovenian legislation. Slovenia already implemented active employment of persons with disabilities through the Act Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment of Persons with Disabilities. Then we also adopted a special act, the Accessibility of Websites and Mobile Application Act. And we also regulate access to the built environment through the Building Act. We also regulated the field of education. Slovenia is aware, however, that the continuous implementation of both the Convention and also EU strategy is very important in order to achieve equal access for persons with disabilities and equal opportunities for all.
Et alors,
So a right everywhere that is set up incrementally with the priorities that have been flagged up based on what you've said. Sophie Cluzel has said the European Union has set up a 2030 strategy which offers a number of initiatives. Which ones are you seeking to prioritize? You can't do everything at once, of course, in your respective countries. Perhaps we can turn to Lithuania.
Yes, regarding the strategy, we, of course, the priorities are, of course, accessibility of physical infrastructure and accessibility of information, and, of course, accessibility of goods and services. And besides that, I mentioned of legislative context and changes in legal system and changes in monitoring mechanisms, we are looking forward to do this soft work as well as trainings, especially trainings for design and construction sector, especially trainings for spatial planning sector, and rising awareness and rising competences in these sectors as well. Plus, it's really important to change the attitudes of the society towards disability issues, and of course, public informational campaigns and long-term campaigns changing the society attitudes. It is one of the key that we have to move forward. And of course, the challenge that we are facing now is the Accessibility Directive. And of course, it's a challenging exercise for us. And I hear that for majority of the EU countries. And it is important thing that we have, of course, have to look at it quite horizontally. And now we are in the final steps of creation of national mechanism, coordinating and monitoring system, and of course market surveillance and authority system, and of course involved different ministries in this context. Of course, social security and labor ministry is the leader, and of course we have here transport and transport ministry, economic and innovation ministry in this topic, state consumer rights protection authority and justice ministry, Bank of Lithuania as well, and Lithuanian Radio and Television Commissions and other players which are connected with information with accessibility directive. And of course, it's quite interesting and challenging exercise for everyone is universal design in all spheres, not only infrastructure, but universal design in education, system. And of course, it's really interesting topic to implement, but without concrete guidelines, without concrete best examples, and without maybe standardization, it's really hard to move forward. Thank you.
It's true. It's not very straightforward, but how do you envisage doing that in Estonia?
Thank you very much. Well, what we have been seeing is that our already very high-level IT and digital services, what are backed up by the ID card, what every person has, enables us to build on, to improve the accessibility even further. And in the equal access and non-discrimination strand, in the accessibility and enabler rights, autonomy and equality strand, and other strands in the strategy, we are going to really continue with the already existing requirements and improve those. For instance, we have the monitoring of built environment acts where we currently are having an update. We will be seeing if we can add more requirements, stronger requirements that the accessibility really is implemented. And I would like to also mention that there has been several sort of recent developments. For instance, we have since 1st of March introduced the subtitles to all the national broadcast direct sendings, which is absolutely very, very crucial for people with hard of hearing and also people who doesn't speak Estonian as a mother tongue, that we are having this approach for as a basis of the recently implemented task force on accessibility, that the need for access is absolutely universal, so that we are able to bring the visibility and importance of a topic to a wider public, which I think without that isn't possible to implement the strategy either.
Est-ce que ça va impliquer, par exemple, de
Will you be providing training to the construction industry? Initial training, for example? Is that something you're envisaging?
Well, we are certainly taking this example of Access EU competence. Like we have to bring the competence together, and what is really also already important that Estonia since 2015 is implementing a competence center on structural funds, accessibility and equal treatment of all who are involved with structural funds. And this is really something what is backing up all the implementers. So information is provided. And what I also want to highlight is that for a bigger and important cultural events like the singing and dancing celebration, what we have in every second and every fourth year for a major event, we have started since 2017 to offer that in an accessible format. So this is equally supporting information on accessibility for wider public. So we are not planning in this respect. We have actions what are planned, but we are seeing that all this should be addressed for the society as such. Thanks.
L'accès à l'information, on le voit, c'est vraiment quelque chose d'important. Est-ce qu'il en est de...
What about you in Spain? what can you tell us about the 2021-2030 strategy for access to information, and what other priorities you're expecting to bring to bear?
Sí. Bueno, en España.
So in Spain, things are crystal clear. We know full well that we're going to be doing our best to apply the convention, the Disability Convention, in Spanish law. We'll be working on institutionalization. We're going to be advocating opportunities for people to leave institutions, which will promote inclusive education. We've also brought out a pioneering law, and others can draw inspiration from that to acknowledge disabilities. In Spain, we want to have a specific law to help us make decisions, particularly in inheritances. Of course, we need to safeguard the disabled, but we also need to defend the handicapped so that they can make informed decisions with an inheritance, for example, or any topic under the law. As I was saying earlier on, we're going to try and enfranchise women and girls to move away from a patriarchal environment. Female disabled will receive a particular focus from the government. It's also important to say that in terms of accessibility, Spain will next week will be passing a law rather that will be recognizing and regulate cognitive accessibility. This is a universal accessibility, so people suffering from intellectual disabilities, autism, mental disorders, even the aged. Europe welcomes numbers of aged migrants. All these people should be able to live decently. Somebody who has terrible disabilities should be able to visit the Louvre and shouldn't see it as a desperate experience. We'll also be establishing a pilot program for accessibility to ensure that values and knowledge can be reinforced in terms of accessibility and public policy. And I make an appeal to all member states. With the Secretary of State in Spain, we focused our efforts on civil policy. So all member states, they need to open up civil rights, particularly voting rights for the disabled. We need to think about democracy in Europe. We need to make sure that democracy is effective in all our countries, which means removing all those laws that are impediments. We need to make sure that the disabled should have rights by the way they're acknowledged by the UN. Things need to be an equal playing field. So our situation in Spain, I invite you to draw inspiration from it. Thanks very much. Good ideas for best practice exchanges in France. Only last year, I think, people with mental disorders were able to vote. So let's move off to Malta. What are the priorities that you are setting in terms of this European strategy 2021-2030 for the weeks, months to come?
So when it comes to Malta aligning with priorities of the European Union Disability Strategy, I want to point out a few areas where we will focus our efforts. As I mentioned earlier, these will also be pegged to the actions of the National Disability Strategy, since both documents have a level of an alignment. I mean, one of the main things which is important to Malta, which is mentioned by the European Union Disability Strategy, is accessibility of both the built and virtual environments. So the built environment was always a priority for Malta. We have legislation in place for quite a while that basically ensures that there's no discrimination when it comes to certain environments. And we want to continue building on this in line with what the European Disability Strategy emphasizes. When it comes to virtual environments mentioned in the European Union Disability Strategy, there's a number of documents such as European Accessibility Act, Web Accessibility Directive, Electronic Communications Code, Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which are mentioned, and the necessity to adopt a design for all approach. Malta has transposed or is transposing these different documents in line with our legal obligations, but also in line with the strategy. And we want to ensure that as part of our wider obligations at EU level, we ensure that this trickles down to the implementation at the domestic level. When it comes to passenger rights, also, this is one of the things which are mentioned in the European Union Disability Strategy. We also have worked on and want to continue working on domestic legislation as well as enforcement and monitoring to ensure that these are respected. The Accessible EU initiative was mentioned within the Disability Platform earlier. This is something which Malta is participating in through this hub group, which was set up in terms of Disability Platform. So we want to ensure that with our local experience, we can share and work together with our EU counterparts. One important thing, European Disability Card. This card is the only card which is used, like in Malta, as the identifier for persons with disabilities. We want to continue building upon this project. We are proud to have been one of the 8 initial countries to participate in this initiative. For us, it is a priority, and we will continue working also to the subgroup in the Disability Platform with the European Commission on ensuring that European Disability Card is front and center in Malta's policy. Finally, there is a reference to access to art, culture, recreation, leisure, sport and tourism in the European Union Disability Strategy. We also have reference to this in Malta's National Disability Strategy, and we want to ensure that we continue working on these areas together with our colleagues also in the European Disability Platform to implement what is mentioned in the European Disability Strategy. And finally, there is the issue of governance and also monitoring. Without appropriate governance and monitoring, it is useless having actions in place. So with Malta, we want to both make sure that our governance and monitoring facilities are better, and we also want to work together with our counterparts to make sure that we can not only implement actions envisaged by the European Disability Strategy, but also ensure that there is monitoring and governance with all stakeholders relevant, including civil society, with persons with disability at the center. Thank you.
Merci. On termine ce tour de table en...
Thank you very much. Let's wrap up this roundtable. Let's go to Slovenia. Same question. What about your priorities? What priorities have you set? And what about best practice? Is there anything that you'd like to take home based on what you just heard?
Yes, as I mentioned before, what we have all implemented, I would like to tell you something about best good practice in Slovenia. In Slovenia, we have prepared several projects for the purpose of achieving accessibility and multimodal mobility for persons with disabilities. In 2017, a project facilitating multimodal mobility for persons with various handicaps starts, and with the object to raise the quality of mobility of vulnerable groups with the use of advanced technologies. This project is bring better quality of life for all vulnerable groups, which is also used for elderly persons, for families with children, use wheelchairs, temporary injured children, and so on. It's very important that we regularly maintain data link layer for the mobility of persons with various handicaps. The system will provide a standardized, methodologically defined and harmonized model of data and metadata preparation, as well as specified maintenance procedures. In 2016, this is the second project, Slovenia began with the EU Disability Card. It's an international project which surely have a long-term impact on the better inclusion of persons with disabilities in the society of the EU. The disability card enables persons with disabilities to enjoy more benefits while traveling at home and in other member states. At the same time, the project affected the awareness and information regarding persons with disabilities, their abilities, needs, desires, and lifestyles, and particularly pointed out that persons with disabilities were people who traveled and personally grew in a way like others. Then the third project, in 2014, we started a project named We Can Do It. It's a project which promotes equality and combat discrimination of persons with disabilities, particularly in the field of employment. The objective of the project were to raise the awareness of Slovenian society of the issue of disability and to better inform persons with disabilities of their rights. So it is to make the built environment and information more accessible, to provide better opportunities for persons with disabilities to be independent and to be endured in a society, included in the society, to provide better opportunities for the employment for this person with disabilities, and prevent discrimination and eliminate stereotypes regarding disability in the open labor market. The basic purpose of this project was to contribute to greater respect for the human rights for these people. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup à vous.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Obviously, there's no such thing as a quick fix. There's no one-stop shop, and we can all learn from each other. Thank you so much for contributing to the discussion and sharing your best practice. Now, we have a special guest that would like to welcome. Siv Holst is our key witness for session number 1. Please join us. I'm going to get my service dog out of the way so you can wheel in easily. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Please share your personal and professional experience with us in the area of accessibility.
Thank you very much. My name is Siv Holst, and I was just introduced. I am a woman with a rare physical disability. I'm the Vice Chair of Disabled People's Organizations Denmark. I'm a board member of the Danish Institute of Human Rights and a lot of other things. For more than 20 years, I've been a disability advocate, and for even longer, I've been an active member of civil society on a local level, on a Nordic level, on a European level, but I'm also a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. And I do have experience doing development work in countries like Ghana and Uganda. It is with this background and as a candidate to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that I address you today. A Union of Equality, a strategy for the rights of persons with disability. That is the strategy we are going to discuss here today. How to implement, how to improve accessibility, and how to access right. And yet, at this time, our eyes are turned to Ukraine, and our hearts bleed for the people pouring out of the countries as refugees from the invasion, and perhaps even more for those who are forced to stay behind, to either defend their country or those who cannot leave. So how can we discuss lofty ideas at such a time? And also, we are facing a climate crisis that already caused fire and flood, hunger and migration. We are facing an energy crisis. We are still facing the effects of the pandemic. So how can we discuss the implementation of the strategy? The implementation of the strategy has never been more important than it is right now. We see that the humanitarian efforts too often leave persons with disabilities behind, unable to flee, unable to access medicine, medical supplies, or the basic things we need to survive, unable to access shelters or help if they can't flee. And the climate crisis has made it even more urgent that we consider how we can create evacuation plans where we save the most vulnerable, where we remember persons with disability, and where we strive to take the necessary action to save our climate. It is urgent to remember the most vulnerable groups in the energy crisis. And we still have persons at risk from the pandemic or vulnerable to the changes we have made in our societies as we return to the new normal. We need to create a new foundation, a foundation where we can all have the chance to live, to be a part of society, to get around, to be able to educate yourself, to get a job, to have the best possible health. We need to secure a true union of equality, where both men and women can thrive even if they have a disability. We need to create an accessible society, too ambitious when it comes to European New Bauhaus, the accessible EU, the urban mobility, to ensure that the European Accessibility Act lives up to its full potential, that our trains, our ferries, our buses, our planes are a possible mode of transportation for all. We need to work together, the EU as an entity, our nations, and all the way down to our local city councils. We need to secure a seat at the table for disabled people's organizations. We need to ensure the voices of persons with disability as we plan for our future. And we need to engage the rest of civil society. How can we create an inclusive labor market if we don't talk to the employers and to the unions? How can we create an accessible future if we don't involve the architects, the engineers, those who are going to build the buildings? We need to work together. There's a wealth of knowledge in each of our countries. We've heard here today how many ideas that are from the different member states, how many of us have come up with great solutions. Sometimes in a Nordic country, we do think we have all the solutions, but we are only just have one piece of the puzzle. We need to work together to collect the puzzle and find the common future. We have made a promise with the Union of Equality. With the disability strategy, each of our nations have made a promise when we ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and when we promised to work with the Sustainable Development Goals, when we promised to leave no one behind. It is hard to sit here today with all that's happening in the world, but it's more vital than ever that we join forces, that we create the necessary change, that we lay the foundation of the world where all can live and thrive and where we all have a chance of a future. Thank you.
Merci. Un très grand merci, madame, et aussi pour les...
Many thanks, kind lady. Thank you. There was so much emotion in your words. We are grateful. I'm going to ask everybody to please take your seats. This concludes our first session. Thank you very much.
Première session donc terminée pour laisser la place à la...
Session 1 is now over. We're making room for session 2, which is on another important topic: employment, education. And as Sophie Cluzel was saying, the goal is to build an ever more inclusive European Union. So 3 countries have been invited to discuss this with me: Portugal, Poland, and Cyprus. A quick housekeeping announcement just to make everybody's lives easier. I'm going to ask you to respond in turn. So if you could please sit in the right order, that'd be great. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it just makes it easier for me to know where everybody is. Ana Sofia Antunes, please join us. You're the Minister of State for the Inclusion of PWDs in Portugal. Pavel Vidovek, Deputy Minister for Family and Social Policy Affairs in Poland. And lastly, Cristina Florenzo Cacui, Director of the Department for Social Inclusion of PWDs at the Ministry for Labor and Social Welfare. And Francesca Sbianchi, I don't know whether she's supposed to join us now or later, but she's a member of the Youth Committee of the European Disability Forum in Italy. So let's start with Marta Prismanes. Andres, who's a policy officer at the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. We will also hear from Ms. Rafaela Kira, Head of Policy at the European Association for the Education of Adults, EAEA. So let's first hear from Marta Prismanes. Andres, as I said before, your policy officer with the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. So together, let's discuss the challenges pertaining to inclusive education. You have 7 minutes, and I'm a strict time master, and I don't hesitate to interrupt. So please stick to the time limit. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words of introduction. Many thanks also to the French presidency for organizing today's conference. And thank you for inviting the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education to attend. Before I discuss this, I'm going to switch to English.
Very briefly, what is the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education? We are an independent organization that acts as a platform of collaboration for the ministries that are members of our agency. We help ministries to improve inclusive education through policy and practice changes. We have 31 ministries of education who are members of our agency. I would like to talk to you about inclusive education impact on social inclusion. And I will refer to a publication of 2018 from the agency. You can have access to it in our website, in the publications section of our website. The title is Evidence of the Link Between Inclusive Education and Social Inclusion. And I will present you how social inclusion is linked to education, employment, and living in the community. So I would like to mention outstanding facts of social inclusion and education. Inclusive education increases the opportunities for peer interactions and the formation of close friendships between learners with and without disabilities. There are elements that promote learners' participation, like facilitation of access, collaboration, recognition, and acceptance. Overall, learners with disabilities perform better in inclusive settings than in segregated settings. Attending and receiving support within inclusive education settings increases the likelihood of enrollment in higher education. And the link between inclusive education and enrollment in higher education is dependent upon effective transition planning that begins from the secondary school and involves the community. There are also other factors that influence negatively access to higher education. There are, for example, lack of funding or inadequate help with fulfilling applications. I would like to turn now to social inclusion and employment. Attending an inclusive education setting is one of the factors that increase the likelihood of people with disabilities being employed. Apart from education, employment opportunities for people with disabilities are influenced by a number of social factors, such as employment networks, employers' attitudes, and accessible employment structures. The nature of the curriculum can either limit or increase the opportunities for young people with disabilities to be employed. That is, for example, a specific curriculum where it is adapted for young people with disabilities can prevent them to access employment. High-quality transition programs provided in secondary school may increase the likelihood of people with disabilities being employed. Turning now to social inclusion and living in the community. I understand here living in the community as independent living, being financially independent, having friendships and social networks, and participating in leisure activities. Education and social welfare policies are two interlinked factors in achieving independent living. For example,
Or it promotes skills, competences, and knowledge that is needed to build more inclusive and sustainable communities and societies. So it also has this wider perspective. And then, of course, if we look more at the individual level, adult learning compensates for the lack of initial formal education. And especially if we look at early school leavers, which are unfortunately quite, well, the figures are quite high among people with special needs. And adult learning can motivate people to continue their learning pathway later in life, and can also help people to make the step back into formal education, for example, a vocational education and training program or higher education. And lastly, it also brings people from all walks of life together, and it creates spaces for mutual and shared learning, therefore also combating the social isolation of disadvantaged groups. And that is actually concerning all disadvantaged groups that we can see in learning. There are several policies and initiatives at the EU level that we in adult learning refer to. I mean, the European Pillar of Social Rights, of course, which also has a paragraph or principle on the inclusion of people with disabilities. Then the new European Agenda for Adult Learning that also promotes inclusion. Upskilling pathways that aims to get people further in learning. And the new European Skills Agenda, and there especially skills for life that also enable people to get skills that are beyond skills for employability. And I'd like to just show you a picture of an education center, an adult education center in Austria. I think, yeah, you can see it here. Yeah, it's a beautiful building, a castle, and it's designed to be entirely accessible and inclusive for people with special needs. And that concerns the program of the adult learning courses, but also the building itself. So architects have worked together with all the stakeholders, of course the Adult Education Center itself, to take all possible barriers into account and make the education center open to everyone. And that is for people with visual impairments, walking impairments, so everything that you can think of. Now, I'm just skipping that, looking at the time. We have a couple of recommendations that we'd like to make to the European level. And I guess that the most obvious one is to put the learner at the center. Because barriers to learning are not only from the individual itself, because a person has maybe special needs or so, but barriers can also be circumstantial, and they can be a special work situation or lack of childcare and so on. So learning should be inclusive for everyone, no matter what the barriers are. Intake programs for people with special needs should take all of these barriers into account. Furthermore, we'd like to see a more holistic approach to policies and initiatives, looking really at early childhood education to adult learning, and make it inclusive for everyone. And also a holistic approach when designing adult education centers and programs, and to bring in all stakeholders. A further point that is also often emphasized but still very important is outreach and guidance. Working together with organizations that provide social services, service to people with disabilities, bring them into learning and guide them through the entire learning process. For that, partnerships are very important, partnerships from the local to the European level, bringing in all stakeholders, also employers, social partners, and so on. I've already mentioned the governance perspective a bit, make strategies and initiatives more coherent. and that includes all policies and strategies at the European level. And then finally, the funding side, ensure adequate funding for learning providers that also enable providers to promote inclusivity and accessibility, because this unfortunately costs money. And lastly, fund also staff development. And actually that's the final slide. And yeah, if you have any questions, then don't hesitate to contact me at EAEA. Thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup et bravo pour...
Thank you very much for keeping within the time allotted. Thank you all. Before we start the listening to the ministers on this topic as we did earlier, I would like to give the floor to Poland, to Mr. Paweł Wdowik, to tell us about the situation in Ukraine.
Much. You could see a few minutes ago how the environment was made friendly and accessible. I wouldn't be able to use my notes if I had to keep microphone in my hands. That's why the technical support came and reorganized the microphones. Thank you very much for such a quick response. It means that accessible world is not only a slogan, but it works. Dear distinguished guests, in the light of the Russian invasion on Ukraine, we must pay attention to the increasingly difficult situation of persons with disabilities fleeing Ukraine from danger of war and its consequences. Till yesterday, 1,300,000 Ukrainians crossed Polish border. It's the biggest exodus in Europe since the Second World War, which happened during almost 2 weeks. In this amount of people, almost 100,000 are persons with disabilities, mostly children with disabilities. We also have to keep in mind that almost 500,000 of these people are children. Poland had to become actively involved in many different kinds of activities to help Ukrainian citizens with disabilities. Not only with disabilities, but also with disabilities. It is necessary to secure the basic needs of these people, ensure their safe evacuation, and secure safe place for stay. Nevertheless, in addition to food and shelter, it is also important to ensure medical assistance and the necessary help and support for those with specific health needs. You should know that many of the persons escaping Ukraine go without any documents, without any medicines, and without their rehabilitation equipment, such as wheelchairs, canes, etc. So in the border, we need to support some most basic things like wheelchairs, like the medical solutions for those with diabetes and other diseases. And this is the challenge we never thought we could face in the 21st century. Our society responded in excellent way, showing that solidarity is something what we know and we are ready to share. We also had to start very fast legislative and program solutions which have been already prepared and are just imposed and have been undertaken to support for disabled refugees. It is necessary to provide also information about available forms of assistance and facilities. We have to support Ukrainian sign language interpreters. About 10,000 deaf persons came to Poland already. It is necessary to provide accommodation in accessible facilities with necessary assistance for 24 hours, 7 days a week. For some others, especially children who come with families, we started to organize the day stay and also personal assistance services. Of course, it couldn't happen without cooperation of state government, local government, and NGOs. However, I must admit that this is a big challenge for whole Europe. There are so many needs that it is necessary that we, Poland and some other countries bordering with Ukraine, like Romania, Slovakia, we definitely need support by other European countries. First priority is to cooperate with the Ukrainian side, with Ukrainian government, which works and takes care, and all solutions we impose are discussed with Ukrainian government to define their needs and solutions they accept. It is essential that all European countries work together to provide adequate support. Therefore, from this point, I am appealing to take actions aimed at protection and provide the safety and basic needs for persons with disabilities from Ukraine. We need not only financial support, we need your readiness to invite people, especially those needing the greater assistance, to stay in your countries. As I told you, it is several 100,000 people with different needs. That's why we consider necessary to plan European strategic solutions. And I ask all of you, all countries, as well as European Commission, for establishment of support in creating support centers in Poland, but also in other countries, and to establish systemic solutions allowing Ukrainians with disabilities to protect their independence and dignity. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, sir. It's not easy to speak after you, I must say, but we're going to continue this exchange about inclusive education, and we're going to try and see how each one of you in your country define it and implement that. Obviously, the way in which you implement inclusive education depends on your definition. Let's start with you, Ana Sofia Antunes from Portugal. How do you define inclusive education and how do you implement it?
Good morning for all of you, dear ministers, dear State Secretary, especially Sophie Clazel, dear colleagues of this panel. It's a real honor to me to be here today and can share with you on behalf of the Portuguese government our experience in the area of inclusive education. That is a journey that we started many years ago, something like 3 decades ago. Well, inclusive education for us is something is a subject where we put a big part of our efforts in Portugal, because we intend that we have to use and stimulate all the capacities of all the children since the most early years to develop them capacities, to develop all their possibilities, and to give them the possibility to be adults with as much success as possible. So how can we try to define inclusive education? Well, in our point of view, inclusive education is the process as that aims that aims to respond to the diversity of the special needs of the students, and the way how we try to increase their capacities of learning, their learning process, and how we try to increase the involvement of these students in their life schools communities. Our main revolution in the area of inclusive education was approved in 2018 with the law 54. That is a new legislation that we approve, considering this specific aspect. Well, we did a big change in our model in Portugal in 2008, in a first moment. It was the moment when we decided to close all the segregated schools in Portugal, so all our students with disabilities start to attend the regular schools. all the students with physical or sensorial impairments did these transitions, and also a big part of the students with intellectual or development handicaps. So what we see when we arrive, when I start this, what I see when I start the functions that I actually exerce in the Portuguese government in 2015, was that in spite of this process had been a success. Of course, in nowadays we have 98% of our children with disability include in regular schools, and it also doesn't happen in some severe cases, most severe cases. But what I saw in 2015 is that in spite of these students were included in the regular schools, sometimes they were integrated but not really included, because in some schools they were put in segregated classes, separated classrooms, working only with the special education teacher or with some special technicians. And it is not the objective, of course, it doesn't. So with this new legislation, we try to change our focus. We put the focus not in the students with special needs or that need some specific support measures, but we defend that all the students in the school in some moment, in some point of their school career will need in some moment some help, some support measure. So we organized these measures, these support measures in three different levels: universal, selective, and additional measures that are adapted to all the children that present some special needs, considering the specific level of that needs, if they are less or more demanded. With this change, with this difference that we try to establish in this new legislation, with these new rules, has a strong impact. In fact, what we tried to do was to do the decompartmentalization of the school, and try to no longer labeled these students as the students with special needs, because all the students in some moment of their pathway in the school will have special needs. We consider that with this action, we can work together. We in the education can work together, can share our capacities and our skills with other areas of the government when it's needed, areas such as health, employment, professional training, or social security, and bring more air force to the inclusion process of these students.
Merci. On va...
Only to finish, so 2 minutes, please. Only to say that in our most recent evaluation after the implementation of this new law, 2018, we did this evaluation in this year, 2022, in January, and we could see that in this moment, with this new paradigm of inclusion at schools, we don't have more the students with the support measures needed in separated or segregated classes, but we have them in their classrooms with their colleagues, with their regular teachers, and we have 85% of these students who need selective or additional measures. They are passing 80% or more of their school time in their classrooms with their regular teachers, with the support of the special education teacher, but there in the classroom with their colleagues where they have to be. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On reviendra.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you and to this later on, and to how one can ensure this transition between education and employment, which is why I interrupted you. Let's go back to Poland, Mr. Paweł Wdowik, so that you can tell us how, in the field of education, you approach inclusion.
Poland is already on the way for inclusion in education for more than 20 years, since the changes of 1989. It was the first expectation of persons with disabilities, but also the parents of children with disabilities, that they can decide where we teach, where we learn, and especially in higher education, this process went very well. We understand inclusive education as the right to participate in the same process of educating, including the same rights and the same responsibilities, and achieving the same goals, but having the support adequate to our, students with disabilities needs and possibilities. And that's how it was organized since the middle of 90s at higher education, that students with disabilities fully participated in the regular curriculum, regular courses at universities, receiving support from the special disability units organized at universities, which goal was to remove all kinds of barriers. And we know very well that in education, the barriers of environment are the easiest ones to remove. Bigger barriers are communication barriers for certain disabilities, the access to information for other disabilities, and removing all of these barriers is the biggest challenge. And we must keep in mind that all of this, what we do in the field of inclusion, is not for sake. It's not a political slogan, but it is something which goal is to guarantee each person with disability the right to be full member of society, someone who participates, who builds the society. It's very important, and I must say that personally I was participating in this process for last 30 years. And it was obvious for all sides of this process that we prepare to have one society with those with disabilities who participate as citizens, being also responsible, not only getting benefits. And also in our primary and secondary education, this process went in a bit different speed, but what is crucial at these lower levels of education is that parents are the only decision makers about the type of education a child will receive. We have, in general, special schools, so-called integrated schools, which are, let's say, 50-50 for children with disabilities and without disabilities, and mainstream education, and home education, which is growing rapidly now. And the parents are the only ones to decide what kind of school they want to choose for their child. In our goals as the government, we see the value of keeping all forms of schools, including this mainstream, accessible for children with all kinds of disabilities, but also special schools for those who think that for them it will be a better way of achieving goals. As you may know, the research shows advantages and disadvantages all of these solutions. So that's why we fully support all forms of education. Now we build a whole system of supporting the mainstream schools with some local centers of technology and knowledge. This year, it's the first year when this new concept of local centers was established. So the mainstream school teacher can contact such a center and receive necessary information and necessary training, and also can get necessary equipment. We know that assistive technologies, it's crucial solution now to build independence of persons with disabilities, and access to proper technology is key to success for students with disabilities, but also for teachers working with these students. And of course, we must keep in mind that building inclusive schools is also connected with removing barriers from access to information, means the handbooks and all the written materials prepared in accessible form, electronic formats which are free of barriers, made in the universal design standard, allowing persons not able to read regular print to participate in classes with alternative formats. All of these are offered now by the support centers.
Je vais devoir vous demander
I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you to accelerate.
For 30 minutes, so thank you.
Ah oui, vous arrêtez.
Yeah, so you're stopping. It's in mid-sentence. Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps now we can move off to Cyprus. How would you define this inclusive education and how do you implement it?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moderator. I am representing the Cypriot Minister of Labour, Welfare and Social Insurance, Mrs. Emilianidou, who sends her regards and her congratulations to the French presidency for this conference. Before I will be short in answering this question, because I will focus more on the next questions. But before starting, I would like to say that we feel very much the pain of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian refugees, because we lived this pain also in Cyprus in 1974, when Turkey invaded Cyprus. So we know and we stand by their side of Ukrainian refugees, because we know what it means to leave your house, your roots, and lose your life and need to start again. We hope that this war will end very soon and people will go back to their roots and to their lives again. Cyprus has a National Disability Action Plan for 2021 until 2023 for 3 years, aiming the implementation of the UN Convention and the European Strategy for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Among the 135 actions included in this Disability Action Plan, 37 of them concern the area of inclusive education, and another 6 concern the employment. The Ministry of Education is the ministry responsible for the education policy of students with disabilities, and the Ministry of Labour is responsible for the employment policy and also for the transition stage for the passing of students from training to employment. For the time being, we have a special education law still applying with this name, the Special Education Law, but is undergoing a significant reform. The Ministry of Education, with the support of the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, and in consultation with the organizations of persons with disabilities and the parents of children with disabilities, has prepared a new draft law to reform the existing legislative and institutional framework for inclusive education. An important debate that takes place between the ministry and the organizations, but also between parents themselves and between organizations of parents and of persons with disabilities, is the existence of special schools as distinct structures from other schools. What is a crucial factor, though, that seems to find common ground is that it is the quality of services provided to the students with disabilities that counts more than the place and the structure itself. The debate concerns also issues like what are special needs and what is the difference of the group of students with special needs and the students with disabilities, the specializations of special teachers, the curriculum, the equipment provided to the students, and other issues. It is a process which is undergoing, and we hope that by the end of this year, we will have the law and the regulations completed in order to proceed with the reform. At this stage, that's all. Thank you.
Merci, merci.
Thank you very much. Let's just stay with you a moment to talk about what you're setting up in terms of getting into the labour market, a moment which is key for people with disabilities. No doubt you have something specific to say on that particular point.
I'm sorry, the question was for me again?
Oui.
I cheated a bit because the first answer, your first answer, was very lengthy. Well, the first answer was very lengthy. So something about the transition, if you wouldn't mind. But keep it short, please. Otherwise, I'll be told off.
So the ministry I come, the Ministry of Labor, Welfare and Social Insurance, has the employment policy and the transition of students from training to employment implemented by two departments, the Department of Labor, but also my department, the Department for Social Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. Together with the Ministry of Education, we have established a cooperation framework in order to have synergies in preparing students with disabilities to pass smoothly and effectively from school to work. Through this cooperation framework, students who attend a special school or a special unit in a regular school and have been prepared by the school through vocational training have the opportunity for assessment of employment perspectives in order to be supported and guided towards a proper employment program. A first assessment is carried out by their teachers, and the second assessment is carried out at the disability assessment centers of our department. The disability individual circumstances of the students are assessed, their capabilities, their skills, their preferences, their ambitions, their needs for reasonable adjustments and facilities at work. And then the students and their parents are informed about the different employment opportunities in front of them, and they receive a customized individual plan for employment and social inclusion. For the time being, the perspectives in front of the future employees are finding a counselor in the public employment service, specially trained to support them to find a job. There is a scheme offering incentives to employers to recruit persons with disabilities in the open labor market, funded by the European Social Fund. There is a law through which a person can be recruited in the wider public sector on a quota basis. There is a grant by which a person can establish his or her own small unit of entrepreneurship. And of course, there are the supported employment programs. Students who do not have the capabilities and they cannot enter the open labor market, they have the alternative of following programs of creative occupation in day centers. The results of this transition mechanism in the last 5 years that is implemented show that 64% of students who were referred and assessed did enter the open labor market. 12% entered day centers for creative occupation, and 24% are still waiting for a job. In the last 2 years, due to the pandemic, there has been a decrease in the number of students referred to this transition mechanism, but we hope that very soon we will be in a position to offer them these opportunities. For the future targets, very shortly, we aim that the application of social enterprises in Cyprus, because we had a new law at the end of 2020 for the establishment and registration of social enterprises. So we hope that this opportunity for new jobs will enhance the opportunities that students have in front of them. And by providing the proper training and proper consultancy to them, we will enable them we will empower students in order to become prospective employees or entrepreneurs themselves in this new institution of social enterprises.
Merci.
We strongly, okay, thank you very much.
Un grand merci, merci.
Thank you very much. Obviously, this is very enthusing for all of you, and it's very interesting to hear you. But of course, there are time constraints. Thanks very much for this ministerial roundtable. Stay with us. We're going to be listening to Francesca Bianchi. And Italy is seen as a pioneer in inclusive education. What do you think? Is this really, does this correspond to your bread and butter reality? I'll be making my speech in Italian, my mother tongue. So, the disabled and the handicapped have resources that needs to be acknowledged. We need to have these, give them an opportunity to be part and parcel of social life in the broader community. Everybody has their own personality, their own circumstances, and these need to constitute a capital that they can use to benefit the broader community. Like everybody, we're entitled to build a pathway to our own future. And to be effective in the broader community. Education is designed to get people onto the labour market, to socialize, to live a better life, to be mindful of one's own limits, but also one's own resources. We need to have the tools to be able to identify problems, overcome them, to find a balance between autonomy and independence. We need to build bridges and break down barriers. I've had an opportunity to embark upon an inclusive educational pathway. I met with success thanks to said pathway. I went to an open school, open to everybody. And this helped me be a part of social fabric. I was the first person in my school with specific needs, and I had to find strategies to overcome problems flowing from my disability, and basically to show that I was just as good as my fellow pupils. Often circumstances were difficult. Assisted teaching is not necessarily suitable, and this is why really we need to look at setting up new systems and mechanisms and tools. Now, empathy is the watchword in the professional environment. I could really focus my efforts on a specific slot, but unfortunately, I couldn't find a job in line with my skills and my abilities. The labour market is too blinkered. I realized that I couldn't meet with my own aspirations, didn't have the opportunities. But I have a master's degree in international relations. I have skills to help me run a national not-for-profit association, to be involved in international cooperation, to be part of improving living conditions of the handicapped and the disabled regionally, nationally, across Europe and internationally. Many people are like me who want to make a contribution to their local community. But they meet with problems. Too often they throw in the towel. The European Convention for the Disabled has helped us, however, understand to what extent the EU has prioritized solutions or seeking solutions for the disabled and the handicapped. But we're not where we should be. And political measures need to be measured in their effectiveness. Unemployed levels among the disabled is disproportionately high when compared with those who are not disabled. The disabled and the handicapped suffer more from unemployment. According to 2019 EU statistics, we see that a handicapped person 24.4% less likely to find a job compared with somebody who is not afflicted with a disability. And this really shows that there are problems that need to be addressed in terms of the quality of jobs that's available for the handicapped. The European Convention provides for a package designed to improve the effectiveness of access to the labour market for the handicapped. But there are not specific measures. This strategy should focus not only on the labour market, but also on education. There can be no progress without true commitment from member states. There are many obstacles in the way and to be grappled with by the disabled and the handicapped when they want to find a job. One of these is the minimum wage. Many of us have to face high cost of living, and so we need to turn to subsidies, state monies, to have a decent life, for transportation, for accommodation, and for services. There's a lack of public services that meet with to meet with our needs, and I like to make mention of some of these problems. Public service support is very important. We do receive monies, but once we find a job, they are reduced. And the disabled and the handicapped receives a minimum wage. And with that, they can't meet their needs. They can't be autonomous economically in relation to their family, particularly in these troubled times from an economic and social perspective. So we are appealing to politicians to set up greater flexibility, to introduce greater flexibility in social protection mechanisms to help the handicapped maintain the handicapped allowances at their levels before the time they found a job. Now, this measure is envisaged by the EU in the disabled package. The handicapped want to work abroad. They want to travel because that's basically part and parcel of being an EU citizen. To enjoy that possibility is currently impossible. The young disabled can't enjoy that. As soon as we travel, we lose our entitlements. In actual fact, we are deprived of any right to any support. And we need to wait to be appraised and evaluated, and we have to wait even more to see what type of assistance we can receive in another EU country. And because of this lack of support, we run the risk of losing our job or abandoning our studies. For people who need a 24/7 support, the circumstances are even more desperate. So for the disabled and handicapped, the existing state of affairs is not enough. It's too risky. We're too exposed, and so you don't move, most of us. Freedom of movement across the EU. This should needs to be thought about in this new package. And there's a new handicapped card that should be extended and updated. So the EU should envisage a greater scope of disabled rights, so that the status of the disabled in the EU is recognized equally across EU member states. It's our hope, additionally, that there should be a technology that is developed specifically for the handicapped right across the EU to offer jobs to young disabled. National authorities use European funds to improve accessibility to the labour market. Employers receive subsidies, enabling them to set up adapted workstations for the disabled. So we want all young disabled, they want them to be able to develop and learn in a adapted environment with the requisite assisted technology. That's the bread and butter rule in my country, but in other European countries, we see a segregation within education. That's why it's urgent that right across the EU, we should see more resources allocated to this, particularly in the Resilient Fund or the European social funds or support teaching, assisted technology, curricula. We need to remove any barrier to enable the disabled to learn. Thank you very much for your attention and for offering you my thoughts, my experience, my personal experience as a disabled person. Remember, you all work internationally and nationally. European strategy objectives 2021, 2030 should become a reality. 100 million European disabled are banking on your contribution. Thank you very much. Thank you for your fabulous energy. Thank you very much for your account. The French Ministry of Higher Education and Research, Frédérique Vidal, couldn't be with us physically, but here we see her in a short video. Secretary of State responsible for the disabled, Sophie, ladies and gentlemen, more than a century after the birth of the word autism by the Swiss doctor Eugène Bleuler, autism carries a number of preconceived ideas that is an obstacle to the inclusion of the autistic people within our communities. Now, fighting against these preconceived ideas is also fighting against the unknown, because we don't know the underpinnings of autism. Now, this twofold reason makes research on autism an absolute necessity, because 1 out of 100 Europeans, this unknown is seen in very tangible disorders that afflicts the family, inflicts the person's relationship with other people, his learning pathways and his social and professional insertion. It's high time for Europe to give proper pride of place to these people in school and everyday life. And this opening involves opening people's minds and eyes. It's in the mind. It's by knowledge that will all start. This is why we thought it is important to give pride of place to research on autism within this ministerial conference on the disabled. France believes this is very important scientific ambition. Our national strategy that we launched in 2018 to further inclusion of autistic people saw as its first commitment placing science at the heart of our public policy for people showing disorders connected with autism. In 4 years, this has led to ambitious successes that are bearing its fruit. We worked on 3 areas. First, structuring research on autism. There's been a scientific working group looking at disorders in neurodevelopment. This was established in 2019 to develop a multidisciplinary research network very much linked to not-for-profits for furthering the interests of autistic people, and also linked in with European initiatives. It brings together 110 research teams and involves 14 multidisciplinary collaborations. Research also draws upon 5 excellent centres connected with hospitals that produce knowledge very much part and parcel with the interested parties and carers. So this is very and generally participatory. Second front, research support. We have reinforced the financial support for research in this area. 12 autism and TND projects were selected in 2021 under the National Agency for Research for 5.2 million euros in order to get people involved in this area, research involved in this area. We're continuing to open assistant clinical research positions. 12 will be offered in child psychiatry and autism and TND research areas. And this will be open to candidates in the next month. We also want to have greater amount of data. We have a Marianne peer group that will be collecting information of all types from families afflicted by autism. The ambition being to understand the environmental, social, and genetic determinants of these disorders. The third area of our action, innovation, in order to develop tools and resources that pick up on therapeutic, pedagogic, and the daily needs of children and adults with autism. And since 2020, we've supported the LI Lab, in other words, the Living and Learning Lab on Neurodevelopment. Now, this lab is dedicated to appraising new technologies as well as educative and pedagogical methods that are innovative and they're used with TND sufferers. Last year, this body appraised 16 innovative solutions involving these people, but also for professionals and companies, and is providing support for 3 projects to help people live better with autism. All these approaches, our country sees them as a driving force in European research on autism. Like any disorders where the origins and the underlying mechanisms are difficult to understand, autism requires a broader vision. And this means that we need to mobilize all our knowledge from neurosciences right the way through to human and social sciences, but also making sure that we have many European cooperation initiatives. This is why the Commission last year launched a joint transnational appeal for research on neurodevelopment disorders, open to genetics and digital health innovations. 124 projects were looked at by an international expert panel with carers and interested parties, which made very tangible this idea of the participatory research approach that I mentioned earlier on. 18 multinational consortiums were selected for a global envelope of 19.2 million euros. And I'm particularly proud of the commitment and excellence of the French teams which coordinated 5 of these and provided contribution to 11. The ministerial conference that's gathering you together today will have this European dynamic flourish to the benefit of a million children and adults who suffer from autism and who wish to become fully fledged Europeans. And I thank you for your ambition and your commitment. Thank you very much to one and all. All right, then, 1 or 2 additional information about what comes next. Thanks to all of the members of the panel for their contributions in the auditorium or on the rostrum for these 2 first sequences of our conference. We now embark upon a new development working session as foreshadowed by Frederick Vidal's intervention. She provided us a lovely transition. But before you embark upon that, the heads of delegation, for that particular working session, perhaps we look at the doorstep where we'll be going off to the family photo, and then the delegation heads will be embarking upon their working sessions. Then there'll be a cocktail lunch served here, and then we'll all meet up at 3 p.m. this afternoon for what comes next. So have a lovely sequence devoted to employment. Looking forward to seeing you later.
You're welcome. Thank